First tonight, for the last 18 months or so, the streets of London have been brought to a halt by anti-Israel protesters marching in their thousands upon thousands, hundreds of thousands at times. And there has been a debate, hasn't there, as the months have gone on, about whether that really should be allowed to stand. Whether people, some of whom have been arrested for expressing support for terror groups, others have been arrested for incredibly offensive and at times hateful placards, should be allowed to continue shutting down parts of central London every single Saturday. You might remember Suella Braverman, when she was Home Secretary, referring to those marches as hate marches. Now, from start to finish, and I absolutely maintain this, I have been quite firm in saying that those marches should be allowed to continue. That while the police perhaps need to be a bit tougher with the more extreme fringes of some of these groups, the right to march, the right to protest peacefully is a fundamental democratic right. So I disagree with the people that say this is outrageous, this needs to be brought to a halt. Some protests are disruptive by nature. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be allowed to happen. That is, to me at least, a legitimate form of protest. What, in my mind, is not a legitimate form of protest is what we are increasingly seeing, and we saw again today, where demonstrators from a group calling themselves Youth Demand targeted not a public place or Parliament or the streets of the capital, but a person's house. Foreign Secretary David Lammy's house, to be specific. And this, of course, comes after Keir Starmer and others had their own personal properties targeted in the last year or so. And I think, personally, it's time to say enough is enough. That however legitimate you might think the cause is, however justified your anger, targeting the family homes of our elected leaders is a very, very slippery slope indeed. For me, that crosses the line from legitimate protest into intimidation and harassment. And we've got to say enough is enough. That didn't happen in this case, sadly. The protesters who launched that stunt outside David Lammy's house weren't arrested, we understand. They were moved on, told not to come back. But no arrests have been made, which, to me, is absolutely baffling. Absolutely baffling. If we as a country now think it is completely acceptable for people who don't like what our politicians are doing to go and camp themselves outside their house, and in this specific case, litter their doorway and their front path and their front garden with children's body bags, we've got to a very, very bad place indeed, if you ask me. I think it should be illegal, and I think people who do it to send a message to others should have the book thrown at them, quite frankly. Wonder what you think. Is this a legitimate form of protest? Is it something that should remain legal, as it seems to be? Or do you share my concern that targeting politicians at Parliament, or not targeting, but lobbying politicians at Parliament is one thing. Perhaps even turning up their offices is fine. But when you are littering their own personal family homes' front gardens with body bags, that is not legitimate protest, and we've got to stop pretending it is. 0345 6060 973, the number to call. You can WhatsApp the same number, text me on 84850. And if you're shouting at your radio saying, what about the children in Gaza? I hear you. I hear you loud and clear, but those two things are not linked. They are separate issues. You can care passionately about what is going on in Gaza. You can be appalled even, perhaps you are, at the way that Israel is conducting its actions there. Maybe you're absolutely outraged at the UK government's position on this. All of that is legitimate. That doesn't justify intimidating the family and the family home of an elected official, in my view. However justified your cause is, there are limits to what we should class as legitimate protest. And for me, this example crosses that line very, very clearly. What about you? 0345 6060 973. Should this be seen as a legitimate and legal form of protest, or does it make you as concerned? And I use that term mildly. Outraged is how I really feel about this, as it makes me. Come to your thoughts on that in just a couple of minutes' time. First, though, just have a little listen to what took place outside Foreign Secretary David Lammy's house earlier today. This is the organisation Youth Demand, sitting outside that property this morning.
Primary age school children are the ones most slaughtered by Israel. How can we make them safe in a world which thinks that that is acceptable? How can our children grow up seeing innocent children slaughtered by weapons made in this country?
To your calls on that in just a moment. Firstly, let's talk to James Skeet this evening, who is a spokesperson for Youth Demand, which carried out that protest today. James, I understand you weren't yourself part of it, but you are part of the wider group. What was this stunt? Well, let me ask you bluntly, what did this stunt achieve, sir?
Well, it's brought me on your programme tonight, hasn't it, Ben? Thanks very much for that intro. I do think it's really important that we have these sorts of conversations, that we actually kind of ground ourselves in actually what the situation is right now, right? We're in a situation that since October the 7th, we're looking at 50,000 dead in Palestine, right? 17,400 of those are children. 1,720 of those are babies and one-year-olds, right? Now, the UK is an active participant in that genocide, right? The British military has a fundamental role in facilitating that.
What's the British military's role in facilitating?
In terms of arms exports, in terms of
those come from private companies.
In terms of reconnaissance,
they come from private companies.
Well, I mean, the fact of the matter is that David Lammy, as you well know, admitted in recent weeks that what Israel is carrying out is against international law. Now, the government might have rolled that back a little bit, but the fact of the matter is that there is a glaring admission, and he might argue that he's cancelled 10% of arms exports as a result of that. But my question to you is, does 90% of complicity in genocide not amount to mass murder?
We've covered these issues extensively. We will continue to do so because they're very, very important.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm glad.
But my question to you, well, of course we are. The whole media's talking about it. My question to you, though, was what did this specific stunt achieve? Because we're already talking about the things that... It's a bit different to something like Just Stop Oil, where you could make the case that there wasn't enough focus. One thing you cannot accuse the media of is not covering the situation in Gaza enough. So I ask again,
with respect,
what did you achieve?
You know as well as I do that the way that the British media covers this issue is really not up to scratch.
You're not answering my question.
You know fine well that the way that the Western media frames this issue is not actually an accurate representation of what's happening on the ground.
Can we just come back? I'd appreciate if you come back to the question. What did this stunt achieve?
Well, it's got me on your programme, hasn't it? I mean, you folks in the media always talking about...
So it's just self-publicity you're after?
You always criticise, when...
So it's just self-promotion? Is that what you're saying?
In public disruption.
You do this so you get to do interviews like this, but you're not answering.
Would you let me to finish the question?
You're not answering.
I can answer the question.
Please do.
You always ask. You folks in the media always have real issue when we, organisations like Youth Demand disrupt ordinary people. Well, here's a scenario where we haven't disrupted an ordinary person. We've gone and politely sat outside the Foreign Secretary's house. This is a man who can, with a stroke of a pen, he can stop selling weapons to a country that is using them on children.
I've got to correct you. You didn't sit. Sorry, James. Sorry, James. I've got to correct you there. You didn't, James. You didn't sit. You didn't sit outside his house. You covered his front garden, his doorstep, and his path in children's body bags. Let's just be clear. If you just sat on the pavement as you're making out, that would be one thing. I'd still oppose it. You littered his porch and his front garden with children's body bags. I think that's quite sick.
I think you really you need to kind of focus on actually what the real problem is here, right? The real problem is that 17,400 children have been murdered,
because we've talked about that a lot, and we will continue to do so.
What is it that you would have us do about that, right? Is it acceptable that we have a leadership of this country, that we have people who ultimately work for us, who are allowing that to happen in our name?
Do you think
we have a very simple choice, Ben. We either sit and watch the most horrendous genocide carry out completely unopposed, or we step up and do something. Now, I'm not necessarily, at the end of the day, it's an uncomfortable thing to do. I'm not particularly happy about, sitting outside the Foreign Secretary's house or even coming on your programme and justifying it. But the fact of the matter is that we have a very limited range of options in order to sound the alarm, because you know as well as I do that the British media does not cover this the way that it should. It is not conveying the level of information that the public need to know about this horrendous
James, this interview only works if you let me ask questions. What the argument you're making is that you have no choice. The only way to make a difference is by going and littering David Lammy's front garden with children's body bags. James, let me finish the question.
Report, you'd know
James,
that
this interview's not going to work unless you let me ask questions, because that's how interviews work. I ask questions, you answer them. I'd appreciate if we could stick to that format. You are saying, effectively, that the only choice you have to make a difference is to go and litter David Lammy's front garden with children's body bags. Do you genuinely, hand on heart, think that is going to change anything?
What I think it does, Ben, is it gets me on your programme talking about one of the worst crimes against humanity, right? And you know fine well that the media, we live in an attention economy where the media craves something to talk about. Now, if we politely stood on the street corner with a placard,
think we've talked about
I would
the
not be
issues
on
in
your
Gaza,
programme
James?
right now.
What world are you living in?
About this critical
We've talked about it almost every day for 18 months. And sometimes you think in your this sort of hero complex that you're exposing this issue that no one else is talking about. We talk about it extensively.
Ben, but like the fact of the matter is
it's incredible.
The BBC,
do you listen to radio? Do you watch television? Do you read newspapers?
Regurgitate Israeli propaganda.
Gosh.
And they do not. You
don't think the BBC has guests who criticise Israel, James? Honestly.
Pardon?
You don't think the BBC or any other outlet has guests who criticise Israel and make exactly the points you are without targeting politicians' homes?
Is that the media goes, who knows? You frame two opposing ideas and goes, oh, who knows? They could both be right. But the fact is, Ben, is that we know what's happening. We've seen 50,000 people annihilated. We've seen the entire infrastructure of Gaza completely flattened to the ground. Now, half of the 2.3 million people in Gaza are children, right? They've had their homes, their schools, destroyed. The hospitals are being annihilated. Now, what are we supposed to do? I really do think that you need to sort of, just elevate your perspective a little bit and look at the big picture and see, are you actually going to sit here and complain about sitting outside someone's home when children are being murdered? The fact is we've got a simple choice, and what I would encourage your listeners to do is to join us on the streets.
You're being deliberately misleading here. It wasn't sitting politely outside someone's house, as I've said repeatedly, and you've chosen to ignore.
There is video online. You can watch it for yourself and verify.
What you will see in those photos is a front garden covered in children's body bags because of your group. Let me ask you a different question. What role do you think David Lammy's wife and young children have played in what's going on in Gaza?
Say again, sorry, Ben.
What role do you think David Lammy's wife and 3 children have played in what's going on in Gaza?
Listen, I have no issue with David Lammy's family, and I'm.
So why are you targeting them?
I am deeply sorry if the action we carried out today made.
If you were really sorry, you wouldn't do it, would you? You'd go to his office instead.
But
why didn't you go
Ben,
to his office?
Look. He's the Foreign Secretary.
Okay, so why didn't you go to his office?
If he can't be made to answer for the British, for British arms being used on children in Gaza,
James, I hear you.
Then who can we go to?
Well, you could go to his office, couldn't you? Where his wife and children don't live. Why didn't you do that?
Would that have got me on your programme today?
So it's a publicity stunt. You admit that?
Absolutely, of course, it's a publicity stunt.
And David Lammy's wife and children.
I don't think do you understand the nature of protest? All protest is about publicity, Ben. That's what gets us talking. That's what gets us a conversation happening in society.
And David Lammy's
where we
wife
start
and
to have a
children
conversation about whether it's acceptable for our leaders to be facilitating a genocide in Gaza.
James, and David Lammy's wife and children just have to suck up that harassment and intimidation because it gets you on the radio.
Let's think about all the wives and children that
don't defer. We're talking about the way that you and your group potentially put the fear of God into the lives of 3 children and an innocent woman who have no role, as you said, in what's going on in Gaza. You said yourself you're sorry for it. I ask again, why do you think it's okay to harass people's families when they have absolutely nothing to do with what you're talking about?
You know fine well that those women were not harassing anyone, right? Your
so if someone covered your garden in body bags, you wouldn't find that distressing?
A very threatening 37-year-old live-in carer and a caring mum from Lancaster who are sat outside because they care about what is happening to children.
But don't care about David Lammy's children, do they? They're happy to harass and intimidate them.
Of course they care about David Lammy's children.
So why are they creating such a distressing situation outside their front door then?
Why is Israel creating a distressing situation in Gaza?
But you can't answer, James, can you? You just cannot answer.
I think I can. I think at the end of the day, I think you need to sort of gain some perspective here, Ben, about what's actually important. Are we actually, as a human
you're drawing
species,
a false equivalent.
Are you honest? Are we actually going to sit here and watch what's happening in Gaza and think that yes, that's acceptable?
That's why we've talked about it pretty much every other day on this show. What's going on in Gaza, and we've had a range of perspectives. We've had a lot of people making the points you're making. We've had other people, a lot of callers would agree with basically everything saying about Gaza. As I've said repeatedly, we can do all that, and we will do all that, because it's very important we keep talking about the situation in Gaza and the plight of children there, and I, for one, will make sure we do. You can do all that without intimidating innocent young children here who just happen to be the kids of the Foreign Secretary, can't you?
The matter is that, you know, history is going to view those that have supported this systematic slaughter of children with absolute contempt. And David Lammy will be held to account for not having the spine to cease trading with Israel and halting the British Armed Forces from assisting this genocide.
You're not answering the questions. You haven't explained to me how David Lammy's wife or children have any role whatsoever in what you're calling a genocide. It hasn't been found to be a genocide in any court of law, but you're welcome to your opinion that it's a genocide. You haven't explained to me how David Lammy's kids have any involvement in that. You say you're sorry for targeting them, but then you defend the fact that you chose to do that rather than go to his office. I think it's sick. I think covering anyone's front garden in body bags when there are children and innocent people living in that house who have absolutely nothing to do with any government policy is a really, really bleak state of affairs. Maybe you agree with James. Maybe you think this is a form of legitimate protest. Give me a call. Either way, 0345 60 60 973. James, appreciate your time. That was James Skeet, spokesperson for Youth Demand, the organisation that carried out this protest. Your calls on this to come next.
This is LBC.
The government have rung the changes for business owners. Have you developed your response yet? Contact us by visiting barnesrofe.com. Barnes Rofe, clever accountants for business.
Body pain might not sound like this.